Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Natural Sciences Lecture Series with the Friends of San Pedro Valley Park. I'm Mila Stroganoff, your host tonight, and Adrian is here too, who is back of house, always dealing with IT. Believe it or not, yes, I definitely need him. I hope everyone has had a lovely summer and is looking forward to hearing all about great white sharks. It's a stupendous way to start our 5th year of webinars. A heads up to all. On Saturday, October 19th at 7 p.m., we welcome back Craig Nikitas with a lecture entitled Keep 'em Flying, Helping Raptors in the Human Environment. Craig is our raptor man. Look for our emails or check the newsletter to register for this lecture. You won't want to miss it. And Dr. Emily Taylor will present The Secret Lives of Snakes in November. All snake lovers, get ready, get set, go. I think it's our first one, really, a full set lecture on that subject, Saturday, November 9th at 7 p.m. The format for this lecture will be the same as usual, with a Q&A at the end. Please write questions and comments in the Q&A section because our chat usually doesn't work very well, and I don't know why, but it doesn't. That way we'll have everything in one particular spot. I'm very pleased to say that this lecture will be recorded and posted probably within a couple of weeks. So if your friends wish to view it again, or if you do, please do so on our website, the Friends of San Pedro Valley Park.org. And now to our speaker. I am delighted that Dr. Jorgensen has agreed to present tonight. Allow me to introduce him. Dr. Salvador Jorgensen is a marine ecologist and assistant professor at the California State University, Monterey Bay. Jorgensen's research focuses on the ecology, migration, and population dynamics of pelagic fishes and elasmobranchs, which is a subclass of cartilaginous fish. He has conducted research in a range of systems, from kelp forests to seamounts to the open ocean. Jorgensen holds a BA in Environmental Studies from Sonoma State University and a PhD in Ecology from UC Davis, where he worked on the design of California's marine protected areas. During his PhD, Dr. Jorgensen studied the ecological processes of fish species assembly around shallow seamounts. He's completed a postdoctoral fellowship at Stanford University, where he first became a member of the Tagging of Pacific Predators program as lead researcher on white shark tagging and ecology. Prior to joining the California State University Monterey Bay faculty, Salvador worked as a research scientist at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. So he also heads the research lab, the Ocean Predator Research Lab at the Monterey Bay University. So anyway, take it away, Dr. Jorgensen. It's all yours.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. It looks like we have a nice turnout. I'm really excited to share with you what we are learning about white sharks, and particularly to folks around Pacifica, because I don't need to tell you that you are kind of near the epicenter of where our Eastern Pacific white sharks hang out. And on a clear day, you can probably look across the water and maybe see the Farallon Islands once in a while. Is that right? Maybe not today, but our boat was out there today. And so I'm excited to bring to you some of the recent developments. And so what we know, kind of summarizing, and what we're learning about white sharks off the coast of California. Okay, so it's entitled Population Changes and Ecological Implications. And what are the changes in the numbers and the distribution of white sharks in this area? How is that affecting other wildlife in our wonderful Pacific Ocean here? Okay, so I'm going to roll right into it. And here we go. So the outline of the talk, I'm going to give you a quick overview of what we've learned to date about California white sharks. I've been studying them for over 15 years. First started while I was at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and have continued this research on. And really, we're talking about a species, a group, which is in relatively low abundance. But even though there's not so many of them, they have a surprisingly large ecological importance. And we're seeing some of these effects right here in California through our research as we watch the population change. And so are we seeing an increase, or are we seeing a range shift, or maybe a little bit of both? And that'll be the topic tonight. All right. So how do we study a white shark? Aside from needing a bigger boat, we often just see these animals briefly and they disappear below the surface and are very mysterious. So we need to come up with inventive ways to study these animals. And what we know about white sharks in California from historical records is that in the 1968 region in time, was a period when marine mammals had been hunted to near extinction. And following the Marine Mammal Protection Act, the marine mammals begin to rebound. So in green, we're seeing the mean number of elephant seals at the Farallon Islands going from near zero to beginning to increase, and increasing in this very clear logistical curve here. Hunting is no longer allowed, and these elephant seals start to rebound. Now, observations of white sharks at the Farallons continued kind of near zero, and then gradually began to increase with a bit of a time lag to what we see following the 1990s. Okay, so that's looking back. So this illustrates these really important relationships that white sharks have with the marine mammals, in particular elephant seals here in the California coast. So we use this to our advantage for studying these animals. This is a picture of us at the Farallon Islands. I like this picture because you can see the shark coming to investigate the boat. And in the background, you see the sea lions bobbing around, staying close to the rocks and choosing their moment when they race off from the rocks out into deeper feeding areas, but they have to run the gauntlet. So how do we get the sharks to the boat for that very fleeting period of time? Is we use a decoy. The decoy is the one in black over here, and it's a little bit like fly fishing. You match the hatch and you tie a fly made out of outdoor carpet, and it looks a little bit like the outline of an elephant seal or a sea lion, and you float it out on the water, and eventually our shark comes up to investigate. And this is when my colleague Scott Anderson, who is out today, plunges the camera pole in and starts getting some ID pictures. And so this might look a little bit something like that. After we get the ID, we can attach different types of instruments onto the shark that the shark can take with them and record all kinds of data. Okay, so what kind of research techniques can we use using this method where we only have a couple seconds with the shark close to the boat without capturing it to attach different types of instruments that could really help us in our investigation? We can use different types of electronic tags. We use these, some satellite tags, acoustic tags. This one is a satellite tag. This is an acoustic tag. I'll explain these later. Stomach tags. I have a grad student who's continuing some early stomach tag research that I did, where you feed the tag to the shark and you learn something about what's inside, a little bit like those little camera pills that you might take that explore your digestive tract, and then the doctor finds if there's any, anything in there. Camera tag. The previous video showed us attaching a camera tag to the fin with a temporary clamp so that we can see what from the point of view of the shark and learn about its behavior. Now, when the shark comes close, we can take photos of it and learn all kinds of information about the types of scars it has on it And importantly, we can see this dorsal fin. It has a series of ridges and valleys that we use as an individual identifier, and I'll talk about that. We can also biopsy sample and take small plugs of tissue, which will help us with understanding the genetics and also looking at different chemical tracers that we can see and learn something about their diet. So these are all the tools we have available and have exploited, and we're constantly developing new tools. Our satellite tag, how does it work? We use a small dart that is a bit like a cufflink. It darts into the shark, and that tag goes around on the shark for a long period of time, collecting data. Finally, it has a self-timer. It releases from the shark, floats to the surface, and that's when it can begin to upload the data that are stored. And those data, those signals are picked up by satellite. We can either find that tag and go pick it up in the ocean, or we can get a portion of the summarized data directly to our computer. And so, not far from where you are, I can see Pacifica, I think up there, or no, that's Half Moon Bay up in the distance. And this is Año Nuevo Island, a little bit south of you and north of me. And this is one of the big elephant seal aggregations, also sea lions, that sharks are attracted to. Now, to illustrate what we've learned with these satellite tags, it's very interesting. When we first started putting them on, this tag in particular was put on in 2005 in December here, and it popped up almost a year later, 10 months later, only 700 meters from where we tagged it. And we thought, oh, what's the point? You know, this thing has not moved in 10 months. It popped up at the same spot. However, when we decoded the data and what we call do the geolocation, we found that this tag had made this incredible journey from Año Nuevo all the way out to the Hawaiian Islands and all the way back, and ended up in the exact same hunting ground that it had left 10 months ago. So this really opened the door to understanding that white sharks are not just coastal animals that we thought they were along the California coast. They are capable of these transoceanic migrations. Okay, so we're talking about adult sharks here, and I will summarize what we saw. And we saw not just one of these sharks make that journey, but almost every adult that we tagged went out to the Hawaiian Islands or went out halfway to the Hawaiian Islands in this other location. And so, we expected maybe they would be random in where they would go to, but no, they had three main locations: the California coastal area, the Hawaiian Islands, and this mysterious area we ended up calling the White Shark Cafe, halfway between the California coast and Hawaii. Why did we call it the cafe? Well, look, animal migration is a costly endeavor. It's costly to swim across the ocean. An animal might not know what's on the other side. There are usually only two motivating factors that would cause an animal to migrate this far. One is to search for a meal, and the other would be being motivated for reproduction, meeting someone special. So a cafe could be a place where you go to get a bite to eat, or it could be somewhere you might go to meet someone special. So since we did not know exactly what the reason was, this cafe name seemed to capture both potential hypotheses. So that's the White Shark Cafe. Now I've plotted this over, we can see the ocean here, but it's colored, and it's colored based upon the concentration of chlorophyll. So how much algae, single-celled algae, is floating on the surface, photosynthesizing and absorbing energy from the sun. So if we think about this, these red areas would be the highly productive areas with lots of photosynthesis. These would be the rainforests of the ocean. And these blue areas would be very clear water and hardly any photosynthesis going on. These were kind of like the desert portions of the ocean. In fact, this area was called the desert of the Pacific for many years. And so for a reason, because there was no apparent productivity at the surface. So this was a real head scratcher for us. Why would these animals migrate so far out into the middle of the desert? And I began to think, oh, it's a little bit like Burning Man. Here we got these white sharks from the Bay Area moving out to the desert once a year, and then they come back. And what do they do out there in the desert? That's unclear, but that's where they go. Okay, so it's sort of the white shark Burning Man, the white shark cafe. Now, when the sharks come back, they're very predictable in where they go, and they're very predictable when they come back. And right now, let's see, we are in September, October, so we are right about here right now, and this is just the beginning of the ramp up for the adult white shark season. You've heard of Sharktober, and they call it that. We call it that for a reason, because in October is when the detections of our sharks really ramp up, and these data are from detections at the Farallon Islands, and it's very representative of white sharks on our coast generally. Now, the timing of this is very much tied to the haul out period for juvenile elephant seals. We saw that relationship early on with the elephant seals, and here you can see the timing lining up really well with their the fall juvenile haul out. But interestingly, not at all with the spring haul out. And I won't get into the reasons, but this timing is very, very tight, and that relationship is very apparent. Now, I did mention that with the adult white sharks, we are getting fin IDs. And so every fin is unique, and it's like a fingerprint. And so we are collecting IDs at, now, so far I've mentioned Año Nuevo. I've mentioned the Farallon Islands. Here's Pacifica. We collect them, Point Reyes, there's another elephant seal haul out, and Tamales Point is another hotspot. So between these 4 sites, we have over 4,000 IDs to date. Okay, and this is not that there's 4,000 individual sharks. Quite the contrary. Any given day that we go out, we get about a 60% recite. So if we saw 10 sharks one day, 6 of those would be sharks that are already in our database. Okay, so this mark and recapture of the fin IDs allows us to do some very important and interesting stuff, including estimate how the numbers are changing over time. And so in our recent paper, my graduate student, who now has graduated and was also out at the Farallons today, did the calculations and the math in a mark recapture framework. And I'll just walk you through this graph, very simple. If we're at 1, that means the population is replacing itself. If it's above 1, it means the population is growing. If it's below 1, the population could be declining. And so these distributions that you see are for the different demographics of subadult males, subadult females, adult males, adult females, and then all combined. So if we just look at all combined, and we have these simulations, 10,000 simulations based on, the market capture patterns that we're seeing, we see that overall, the peak is slightly above 1, but some of them, there could be some error here. But if we break this down by group, we see that adult females and adult males seem to be pretty clearly in a population growth mode. Okay? Now, this is a little bit puzzling because if you have a population that's growing, you would expect to see the juvenile portions of that population growing out first, because there would be more youngsters before it fills out. This is not what you commonly would see in a growing population if the overall numbers. So it leads to the question, is the population increasing, or are these sharks moving into the area of our research at this stage? Okay, so some clear evidence that there's an increasing. It's definitely not decreasing, but we're a little bit unsure whether that is a change in distribution or overall numbers are actually increasing. Another really interesting thing about the fin IDs is that while we recognize the same individual, sometimes we can recover historical photos going back as far as 1993, and we can match these with more recent photos. In this case, here's an individual 24 years later. And just to show you how good the fin is as an identifier, look at the symmetry in these two, and you can see that it really hasn't changed in 24 years. In fact, this shark was already 16 feet estimated in 93, and by 2017, it was estimated about 17 feet. So it was already an adult. So add 24 years as an adult to however many years growing to the point of 16, and you realize that these animals can be quite long-lived, and they return over and over to the same location. Okay, so very interesting for adult white sharks, something totally unexpected. And the fact that they do return, once we learned that, it wasn't too surprising what we learned with their genetics, and that this population that I described, from samples from this area of the Pacific, compared with other areas, they're genetically discrete, and they've been isolated, we estimate, for some 200,000 years. So despite the fact that a shark in one season can swim all the way to Hawaii, and from Hawaii, it's almost equal distance to swim across the Pacific in the other direction. In fact, some of our white sharks go all the way out here, and it's even closer to Japan. Midway Island is kind of the midway point. But instead of that, or going this way, they return to the place of their birth year after year, generation after generation, for at least 200,000 years. So these sharks are a little bit more like salmon, in that salmon return to the stream of their birth to give birth. And this is what a fascinating behavior, and something maybe not expected in such a large animal that can clearly traverse the ocean, but it leads to these isolated genetic populations. Now, that's kind of a summary of adult white sharks, and I want to move and talk about the juveniles a little bit, because they're very different. They are not large enough to feed on elephant seals at this point. Although this is a newborn shark, they're large at birth, and they do not have any parental care. They are, it's just drop the kids off at the pool and that's it. You've got your teeth, go for it. And they do quite well. Now, since they do not eat mammals, we don't attract them with a decoy. We kind of sneak up on them while they're surfacing. And they tend to inhabit coastal areas all up and down the California coast. And in our early research on juveniles, we identified these nursery areas where the females likely come in, give birth, and then leave. And those extend although from midway down Baja, Vizcaíno Bay, up to the Southern California Bight. And the sharks, this kind of growing area, they grow up here in the first 3 years of life, and they go north and south with the seasons a little bit. Now, why are they not in the areas where the adults are? Well, one theory that we have is that the Southern California Bight, which I just showed, is quite warm, and there's a big break between Southern California and Northern California with regard to temperature. The color we're seeing now corresponds to temperature, and we know how cool the water is here compared to San Diego and in those locations. And that right at Point Conception here, there's a big break. Now, why does that matter to white sharks? Well, white sharks, I just finished telling you they're more like salmon, and now I'm going to tell you they're more like mammals than sharks because they have an internally warm temperature. They are endotherms. And here's a cross-section of a shark showing where the core part of the shark is a lot warmer than the ambient temperature. So that's up around 25 degrees Celsius. Our body temperature is more like 39, I think, Celsius. anyhow, they maintain this warm core. And we think that when the sharks are smaller, they have a greater surface area to their mass and could lose heat more quickly, so that they might be avoiding these colder waters, and their nursery areas are kind of in this Goldilocks zone. Not too hot down here where it turns red, and not too cold up here where it turns blue. They kind of like this Goldilocks zone, and this is where their nurseries are. Okay, at least they were until they grow to a certain size. And here are tagging data from juvenile sharks showing that at about year 3 is when they leave this area and begin to move up. In this case, this one moved up towards Point Reyes, and this one is still a young of the year in the nursery area. Okay, so to kind of summarize what we knew and to put that in the context about how things have changed, we've got our nursery area here. We've got our adult white sharks up here in yellow. Our adult sharks are migrating out to the cafe. They're going out to Hawaii, and they're coming back. We also have some adults out at Guadalupe Island offshore. They do this interesting, mirrored migration out to the cafe as well, and then they return there. And we think that both of these groups share this pupping ground. Their pups are born here, and then as they grow, they recruit into one or the other groups. Now, that was the story until we started getting all this warm water in about 2014. The warm blob, the marine heat wave, El Niños, back to back. All of this warm water meant that suddenly, starting in 2014 and really ramping up, we began seeing juveniles in the Monterey Bay. And if we look at this aerial picture down on the right corner, you can see one, maybe two. Actually, if you look closely, there are 8 sharks in this one frame, right north of the cement ship and just south of New Brighton State Beach. Okay, so what is happening here? Well, maybe some of you may be familiar with iNaturalist. We did a couple of different things. We pulled data from iNaturalist, and we began seeing these observations. The first one we found actually in the Monterey Harbor was in 2014, and we started seeing them around the bay. Now, the locations, exact locations, are scrambled a bit by iNaturalist, so people don't go collecting endangered species. But you get the picture here. Gradually, these have been increasing. We see that ramping up, the numbers, and mostly in this northern part of the bay. What size are these animals? Just focus on the green. These are the measured, validated things. They're on the order of about 1.8 meters on average, okay? Now, at birth, they're about 1.4 to 1.5. So we are seeing newborns, and we're seeing first years, and possibly a couple 2-year-olds that we never saw before, starting in 2014. Okay, so this is a size distribution of these new sharks that we're seeing compared to all our 15 years of data before that in Central California, where we're seeing all of these male green, female here. Females get a little bit larger than the males, 4 and almost 5 meters. And so there was a little overlap, but all of these are something new to California starting in 2014. So what is going on? Well, we did an analysis to look at this Goldilocks zone, okay? And so what we did is from all the tags that we had put on the juvenile white sharks, we collected all the temperature readings. What is their preferred temperature? So their mean preferred temperature is around, is a range, and you can see it here. It's around between 13 and 16 to 17 degrees. It's in this green to orange zone right here. So we said, well, what is the cold edge, of what they prefer? And we placed it around this area here. And we said, okay, well, what's the average latitude that cold edge has been over time? So the cold edge being this kind of barrier that we think is a temperature barrier to their migration north. And when we saw that over time, it jumps around because years are different, but on a long-term average, we calculated that that cold barrier, the northern part of the range, was around 34 degrees. And if we look on this map, this is without, we did this, 34 degrees is right here, and that corresponds precisely with Point Conception, okay? That was really interesting. But then we said, after 2014, let's look at the oceanography and see where that cold barrier is following that. So really, it jumped up 2014, 2015, and then has been hovering around this mean, which, if we took the mean of all these years, that is around 37. And when we look at 37 here, 5, 6, 7, that corresponds almost exactly with Monterey Bay. So to us, this was kind of a validation of our theory that the northern boundary has shifted. And in fact, we've seen a lot of new species in Monterey Bay. If you're a diver and you've been going to the jetty, we're seeing Garibaldis and different snails, and there's birds, and all across the marine taxa, we're seeing species moving from the subtropical up into temperate regions. What is happening is the water temperatures are warming, and the animals near the equator need to maintain this constant temperature. They need to go towards the poles. So they're moving and migrating. Our ranges are shifting. And so that's what we think is going on. And this is a range shift, I think, of 170 something miles. It's quite a big range shift. It was sudden, but this is a big threshold here. So that is what we're seeing. And this is causing new changes in the environment. I'm not going to get into this graph right here, but I will talk a little bit about why Monterey Bay in particular, so if they're in this region, because it's generally warming, why are they concentrated in one area rather than evenly spread out up and down our coast? Well, we turn to seawater temperature again, and what we find a lot of times, and we've been studying this now for a bit, is that the water is quite a bit warmer up in this northern part of the Monterey Bay. And times it's 5 to 10 degrees warmer than the surrounding waters. And so we think that, again, once these sharks have made it up here, and as conditions shift on a weekly or daily basis, they say, oh, I want to actually, there are these little warm pockets, these little stepping stones. So if I'm pushing further north, I'm going to hover in here as a thermal recovery zone. And so that's kind of our working theory right now. So anytime you get a new predator introduced to a system where this predator previously did not exist, and they are coming in at these kinds of concentrations where there's, we might expect to see some impacts in the environment. And one of those impacts has been the sea otter. Okay? So to understand the impact on the sea otter, I want to take us back to the timing of adults and the timing of juveniles to see which of the two. We know that the otters are getting bitten. They're not being consumed. But let's look at the timing. The timing of their appearance can be very telling. So on the top panel, we have our sharks. We know that they ramp up in October and they peak at October, November, and then they drop off. Our elephant seals, we saw that fall haul corresponds exactly. So we call this prey targeting, likely when these two curves line up. Now, mistargeting, we get a lot of otters bitten. The time when they get bitten is actually peaking in August, and not so much during the peak time that the adults are here. Similarly, in the few cases where people have been bitten, those tend to peak at this period of time as well. So we know that people biting is mistargeting, and we believe that mistargeting is occurring with the otters. And you can see from a shark's perspective how one might confuse an actual sea lion with an otter or a swimmer if conditions are murky or such. So this period right here, if we look up, what is going on? Oh, well, this is the period where they're coming from the offshore and they're just starting to appear on the coast. Well, that's a long swim to come back to the California coast. And I've been offshore for, many months. And so I hit the coast. I maybe didn't hit Año Nuevo exactly, but I hit the coast and I'm hungry. I'm looking around and I see something at the surface and I make a hasty decision because I haven't been around the coast for a while. And that's when we think an otter or person might get bit. Now, we've had increases in otter bites over the years. And when do those bites occur? In the kind of shaded area that you see as we go through these year periods, 97 to 99, 2000 to 2002, and so forth, moving in towards the future. This is some work that was put together by one of my postdocs, Jerry Moxley. And we see the period of time that the otters are being bitten is changing a little bit over time, okay? We said it peaked in September, and it kind of does. But more recently, if we look at from 2014 onwards, we see something interesting. A lot of bites are occurring at this period of time after, in these months, July, August, September, so even earliest, June, July, August, that didn't occur before that. And so if we look at the timing here of when the bites are occurring, and we look at the timing of when our juveniles are now showing up in Monterey Bay, there is better alignment here, which indicates to us that the recent increase in bites on otters, it implicates the juveniles. We know that the adults have taken a toll over time, maybe not as regularly, but right now, this seems to be causing a real issue. Now, I mentioned that the otters are bitten but not consumed. I mentioned, probably more accurately, I mentioned that it was a mistaken identity. And the reason for that is that otters, unlike seals insulate with blubber. Blubber has lots of rich calories that can help your body stay warm in a cold ocean. Otters insulate with fur. They have the highest fur count, and I know that you had Colleen speak to you recently. They have the highest fur count of any mammal, 1 million strands of hair per square inch on their body. So great insulation, but not very good food. So butterball or hairball, obvious choice. This is going to be spit out, but it's too late. The shark has already bitten the otter, has broken their insulation, and we do combining the hypothermia with the wounds. These are often fatal, but the otters wash up. They don't disappear. So let's look at where otter strandings occur. Now, here's a map of California, the primary range of the otter's range currently. They used to go all the way from Alaska to basically to Mexico. But now the core range of the southern otter, at least, is restricted basically from San Francisco to Southern California. On this first panel, we can see where their densities are highest around the Monterey Bay Peninsula. There's a big peak right here, Elkhorn Slough. And then the northern part of Monterey Bay. And then it tapers off after that. You guys might see an otter occasionally off of Pacifica, but maybe not as frequently as we have here. Now, let's look where the kelp is distributed. There's almost a perfect correlation with kelp and otters. We know that otters assist the kelp by eating the urchins. And so they kind of promote kelp growth, but also they live in that environment because that's where all different kinds of food can hide out and they can find it. Now, let's look at where the shark bites on otters are occurring. And it seems to be wherever there's otters and there's no kelp, we get high numbers. So right in here, there's a break in the kelp. There are otters, and we get a lot of bites. Here is kind of where the kelp tapers off, and we get a lot of bites. up here in Monterey Bay, we get a lot of bites inside the bay where there's no kelp cover. And then right at the north of the bay, this would be Aptos and the cement ship and so forth. And then we get bites along here going forth. So kelp plays a huge role in mediating this relationship between otters and white sharks. Now, I'm not saying that sharks don't go in the kelp. Here's a video of a white shark swimming through the kelp. And if you look closely, you will see seals swimming by and seals hunkered at the bottom and bubbles. The seals are blowing bubbles at the shark. They're hunkered down, they're hiding in the kelp. It's a cat and mouse game in there, but the shark is not going for them. They are kind of concealing their profile in the kelp, and they find some refuge in there. I'll play it again and look here to see your first seal right there, some bubbles. There's going to be a couple more right here. Here we go, seals. Down here, there's two. And there you have it. So let's summarize this bit right here. What we have, juvenile white sharks begin to show up in Monterey Bay starting in 2014, following marine heat waves and general warming trend. 280-kilometer north of their previous cold edge, the edge of their range. So their range is shifting poleward, like so many species. The bites on otters are increasing in the summer. And we attribute these changes to climate change being the driver that's shifting these distributions and rebalancing how the ecosystem is interacting. Now, I want to turn to one more interaction that white sharks are having along the California coast, and I'll wrap it up there. This one is with not a prey item, but another top predator. We've got our white shark distribution in green, we've got our elephant distribution in purple, and we have our killer whale, orca distribution here in gray. And so all three of these species co-occur in this, Venn diagram range right here with its epicenter right outside your windows and right at the Farallon Island. So I showed you these data of our elephant seal haulouts. Here we have our shark timing, and here we have orca observations over time at the Farallons. Interestingly, the orca can be observed during this haulout and during this haulout, but the sharks, otters, and orcas occur together, usually only at the Farallons, usually only in October, November period. What happens when orca meets lamnid shark? Well, you've probably heard that it doesn't end well for sharks. But white sharks do have a very interesting mechanism, and a study that I did a while back will illustrate this. So as a background, there are many different ecotypes of killer whale, and they're largely defined by the type of food they eat. Teleost, fish eating, mammal eating, okay? Transients. Offshore whales, they eat fish and elasmobranchs. And in fact, they specialize in elasmobranchs sometimes, okay? And you can see the difference in their teeth, okay? We got these sharp, pokey teeth for grabbing onto slippery fish. These teeth are a little sturdier. These are the mammal eaters. And these teeth are worn down to nubs. Why? We think that's from the skin of the shark being so like sandpaper. And over time, it rubs down the shark. So it looks painful. Rubs down the killer whale teeth. So this is an example of the teeth you could find on an offshore killer whale, okay? So what happens when orcas come to the Farallons at the peak of the white shark season, when the sharks are taking we count about 60 elephant seals in a season that we observed, let alone the ones that are not observed. We regularly see predation events there. And so the sharks are at the Farallones, they're hanging out for several months, okay? And here are our listening stations where we have, I talked about acoustic tags. We have acoustic receivers that can hear our underwater clicking tags. They're a little bit like a barcode, shopping barcode. So every time a shark swims by, it's going to pick that up, that barcode, the identity of the shark. So at these different sites. So I'm going to show you a graph now that shows. Oh yeah. So here's an explanation of how these acoustic tags work. The tag's applied to the shark. It just pings. Okay, doesn't collect data, but every time it swims by one of our receivers, it registers the identity and the time, and we know the location. So now I'm going to show you a graph that where we have several different sharks, 19 different sharks on a timeline, okay? And we're counting down to times 0. And I'll tell you what times 0 is in a minute. But let's take shark 1. Shark 1 is first detected here on the east side of the Farallones, then on the west side, and west side, west side, west side. These are days, so 20 days, like constantly. Okay, shark 2 constantly at the Farallones, constantly. Shark 9 was somewhere else. Okay, where was it? Blue. It was at Año Nuevo. Okay, what these sharks have in common is most of them were there at time 0. What happened at time 0? Well, time 0 is actually 2 lines. If you look closely, there are 2 lines with a tiny space in between them. Those 2 lines represent when killer whales arrived and when they departed. And so what happened immediately upon the arrival of the killer whales? Every shark that was present disappeared, was no longer at the Farallones. The Farallones became a ghost town. And those white sharks, none of them were actually eaten. We've detected those sharks in other places somewhere in the future, okay? So a lot of them never showed themselves on the coast. A lot of them went over to this blue zone, which is Año Nuevo. Some of them went to Tamales Bay. And some of them came back to the Farallones just briefly. They poked their nose in and said, this one, no, 8 days later. This one, 20 days later, was there for a couple detections and gone. This one, 27 days later and nothing. So nobody stayed until the following season. So essentially what happened, the orcas came in, they created a lot of chaos. There was a lot of predation going on. It was very unclear what was happening, but they created a landscape of fear. And the white sharks were able to sense this and all took off. Not only did they all take off, but they knew not to come back. And in fact, even the sharks that were never there, when they came back, they could sense that something was wrong and they left immediately. Same with this last one here on the top column. It sensed something weird and took off immediately. So here's another really interesting ecological interaction. Now, what happens when all of the white sharks leave a spot where they typically predate on elephant seals in such great numbers? That gives a huge break to that year's cohort of elephant seals. So none of them are getting eaten up after November 2nd, which this happened on November 2nd. And so for the rest of the season, there are no predators in the water. There's no orcas, there's no white sharks. It's just frolicking time. So a pass-by of orcas creates a risk effect, a landscape of fear. The white sharks run away, and that releases elephant seals from predation for a whole season. Just an example of one of the complex and powerful interactions that predators have are predators here along the California coast. All right. So essentially what our work is doing is kind of redefining or adding to how we understand the environment. We have these historical models, interesting food chain. We talked about how the urchins eat the kelp, but the otters eat the urchins. And so we have this interesting benefit that the kelp has for the otters, right? But now we can add to this this whole other chain that happens here and how that chain also interacts through the otters into this. And so this trophic chain is becoming much more of a trophic web in the way we understand it, with these emerging interactions that we are discovering here in California. All right. So in conclusion, we're seeing a general increase in Central California of the adults and juveniles shifting into this area. We think that this is climate driven. There is a much more complicated ecology than we first thought, including non-trophic effects. So effects that are fear-based instead of, food-based. So what are our next steps? I want to just show you this briefly. These are my graduate students here at UC, at CSU Monterey Bay. I've been here for 2 years and ported my lab here. We're doing all kinds of really cool stuff. Alyssa's looking at mating behavior. Duncan is devising some samplers that will sample from the white shark's stomach to look at their unique microbiome. Nobody's ever looked at this. Anthropogenic effects, propeller scars, and interactions that these juveniles are having, as they bask around on the surface in high use areas here, which is new in Monterey. We're doing drone surveys. And Kelsey's looking at the remote sensing. I'm very proud of these guys. They've been doing excellent work. They were featured on CNN International this summer. And so it's been really exciting to kind of shift my gear and become more of a mentor and teaching this next generation of exciting scientists. Our lab is the Jorgensen Lab, or the Ocean Predator Ecology Lab. And very excited to have the opportunity today to share some of our findings. Another future direction is looking at this. Now my screen is, this is cut out a little bit, but I want to move this over so that we'll be sure to see this. Okay, I'm going to pop back in here. One of the interesting things we're seeing, I told you about this warm spot here in the Northern Bay. Now this year we had a really interesting situation where we had all this warm water up this way, okay? And off of Half Moon Bay up into this area. And so we don't have any drone surveys currently up here, but we would suspect, if our hypothesis is correct, that our juvenile sharks could be responsive to this. And so we want to continue looking north and would be excited to hear any observations that you might have of juvenile white sharks. You usually see them right past the surf line in warm shallow water on sandy beaches. So you might be seeing those coincident with these warming water that we had about a month ago. All right, with that, I'm going to finish it up. And thank you very much. And remember to hug your shark. And and I should point out that all of this work, most of it's all published, has been a huge undertaking by so many different people and groups, from the California White Shark Project, the Monterey Bay Aquarium, Stanford, CSU Long Beach, Mexico, collaborators, and Bari, and so forth and so forth. And here's a list of all the different agencies and collaborators that we've worked with over the years. So I'll end it there, and I'll leave a little time for questions, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Salvador. That was absolutely fantastic and something absolutely new to most of us. I mean, we had not heard of these, all of this research and the dynamics that have obviously been going on and changing with regards to trophic levels in terms of everything else that, and global warming and water warming and so on and so forth. So since the tropics are getting so much warmer, possibly then, so are the sharks actually preferring to go up north, or are they also still staying in the southerly waters?
One of the graphs I showed, I kind of breezed by, is that the available habitat, according to our analysis, is actually shrinking of how much of the preferred temperature is available. So not only are things shifting up, but the area of the Goldilocks zone is shrinking a little bit over time. So that's interesting. It's expanding in the north, shrinking in the south, and it's shrinking overall. So we think that they will be squeezed from the warmest spots. But it's interesting. Look, if you're in the ocean and you're too warm, you have a place to go. You can go down. As you go down and deeper, it's cooler, so you can cool off.
Mm-hmm.
If you're at your cold edge and it's too cold, there's nowhere to go. You can't go down. You go to the surface and that's it. So the cold edge is much more of a hard edge than the warm edge of the range. And that's why we see them, we think that we see them up here basking on the surface. After the fog lifts, they sit up at the surface, almost like trying to find that film of warm water that you see in lakes. Sometimes you kind of hover there and keep your body warm. We think that the sharks are doing that at the surface. Yeah.
And the gill nets that have been removed and are not catching the young juveniles now, is
Yeah.
that increasing the population?
Yeah. So yes, and so following the gillnet ban in Southern California, the original ban was to exclude them from, I think, 10 miles from the coastal areas, and we think that had a huge benefit to juvenile white sharks because they were getting entangled in those nets fairly regularly when those nets were close to shore, and now there's further bans, and so. Yeah, that's a benefit. Now, I should point out that in Mexico, there are not the same kind of gillnet bans, although there are more protections for white sharks in Mexico than there are here. And they have a closure for all elasmobranchs during the summer for most elasmobranch species, so zero landing at all. They can still use gill nets in places at certain times of the year there that can entangle white sharks accidentally. So there are still some issues, but that's been a huge benefit for this species for sure.
For sure. And before I take any, I know there are some questions, but with the outer surface of the sharks, which is very, very tough,
Yes.
and trying to attach these tags,
Yes.
satellite tags, other types of tags that you're attaching, how do you get through that in order to have it stay there, actually attach itself through this toothy
Yes.
and rough surface that
It's a toothy, yes, it's a toothy, rough skin, dermal denticles. Actually, it's pretty fascinating. Sharks have teeth on their skin. And in fact, we think that teeth, people would think, oh, the teeth started in the mouth and then evolutionarily they migrated to the skin. In fact, teeth started on the skin and migrated to the mouth over evolutionary time. It's something that we don't think about. So the original teeth, the sharks still wear on the outside, and they have specialized teeth on the mouth. Yes, the skin is very tough. We have a small titanium dart that pushes through, and it's like a cuff link. It goes through, and then it toggles. So it goes through the skin, and then it turns sideways, and then it has a little attachment there to the skin.
So as they grow, it still stays in.
It still stays in, but they come out like a splinter eventually. Yeah. So we've tracked about 70% retention per year. So every year, 30% of it comes off. So it has over time, and we have photos of them, and over time they shed the tags. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to the questions and see what. Oh, Catherine from Port Angeles, yes. Hello, Catherine. Nice to have you here. Okay.
I see one question here. Why do this? If they feed on sea lions, why aren't they hanging around Pier 9 at the Santa Cruz Wharf? Or right now, if you've been to Monterey recently, the whole beach by the Coast Guard beach is closed off. The seals have moved in there. The answer is the sea lions are much more agile, and sometimes we see the sea lions chasing the white sharks because they are very agile in the water. And whereas the elephant seals are kind of lumbering and more easy target. Also, the elephant seals are capital breeders, and the capital breeder means that they go offshore and they stock up that blubber for half the year so that then they can go haul up on a rock and not have to eat for months. Now, that means that they stock up a huge amount of blubber, and at that point, that's the real reward. And so the sharks prefer the elephant seals, and that's where they hang out. But they will take a sea lion. I've seen it many times at the same place, but they probably wouldn't come around the Pier 39 because they would get chased off by marauding sea lions.
Yeah, there's plenty of sea lions there for sure. That's a squawky little area.
Yeah.
They're fighting each other. And then when you do go out to the Farallon Islands, you're in these little boats, and Adrian and I have been out to the Farallon Islands, and it's rough going with the change of currents and so on. And you folks are out in small boats.
Yes. The boat you saw there was a very small boat. It was a beautiful boat. It's a beautiful boat that actually piggybacks on a larger boat. So we make the trip across in the larger boat and then lower the small boat out there.
So you check to see if conditions are all right for the smaller.
Oh yeah, even in the calmest time of the year for the Farallon trips is in October. After the spring winds and before the winter storms, we got this period, so that helps. But it's very challenging, and yeah, not every day is a pretty day out there, as you probably know.
That's for certain. Yeah. We went out for an 8-hour trip. No,
Oh yeah.
not a pretty. No, that wasn't a nice day. No.
You have to really want it, that's for sure. Yeah.
Let's
And
see.
so one thing I would point out is that a lot of the research was done with the help of citizen scientists as well. So we work with folks who have boats, who would like to put their boat to work, and if it's the right kind of boat, and we can and they want to come out on a research cruise, and our good captains and stuff, we can work with that. We like to work with people who spend a lot of time on the ocean, like yourself, who have maybe really interesting observations or have kept logbooks. Because we spend a lot of time in the ivory tower writing reports and papers and doing presentations. It's nice to have the collaboration from citizen scientists who do spend a lot of time on the ocean. So if anybody is kind of in that situation, feel free to reach out to me. I think you'll share my email, hopefully.
Absolutely. Thank you. Let's see, what else was there that thanks. What else? I was making all notes. Yes, and it was indeed Colleen Young, as you mentioned, who was from the California Parks and Fish and Wildlife.
Yes, Fish and Wildlife.
Wonderful talk on otters. And so now this complements and adds to our knowledge, of course. And it's fascinating to see that the great whites all have their sort of their areas, and they don't really interbreed. They've really gone into this form of speciation where they stay apart, having stayed apart so long. They don't really interbreed.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and yeah, it's really interesting. And in parts where the populations are a little closer together, there's more exchange of, let's see, the male gene than there is exchange of the female gene. So in this case, both are separate. In the case of there's some exchange between, for example, this is really interesting, between South Africa and Australia. And so they saw, oh yeah, look at that. The male gene is more mixed, and the female gene is very separate. And so they thought, oh yeah, because it's probably because of those males that they get around or whatever, right? In fact, after they tagged, it was the females that were migrating to the other site, collecting the male genes, but coming back and always giving birth at their place. So it was the females that were the promiscuous ones exchanging the genes. Yeah,
they're looking for their mates.
in the adjacent population, yeah. But
Yeah,
bringing that in. So the male genes were transferring, but the female genes were not.
well, that's
So
good. Then you have some genetic interchange, you know?
you got
Obviously, I mean, who wants to mate with your neighbor? Come on, let's go halfway across the
there
ocean,
you
or
go.
Lord knows how far, and
Yeah.
let's meet another entity or a couple of entities. We can come back.
But in either case, the female still returned to its birthplace to get to have its pups, and that's really to me, that's kind of the mind-blowing part about that, is that that instinct is so strong. Yeah, even though they don't give parental care, they just go. Their pups are dropped off, but it's just it must be some incredibly strong instinct, for with the map and the geography, sensory, yeah.
And they are so huge when they're young. I mean, when they're just born, to think that the female has to deliver such a
Yeah, up to
large,
12.
large
Yeah.
baby,
Yeah, 12 of them, 12 4 to 5 foot babies. Yeah. Up to 12. Yeah.
Up to
These are
12.
yes.
What do you mean up to 12?
To 12 in a litter of
12.
4 foot.
One female.
Yes. At a time. Yeah.
One female delivers 12.
Yeah. 12 well-developed 4 foot babies. Yes. I mean, these animals are 19, 20 feet long, and look at the picture. There's how wide they are. So when you see a large female, it's even wider than this one. So they can pack them in there.
Holy smokes. I would
Yes.
never have thought that they would have such a brood.
Yeah,
Oh,
but only every it's more, their gestation period is more than a year, so maybe every second year. It's seasonal, so we think every at the most every second year they can have a litter.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So, what is the range of great white sharks? You mentioned, I think Australia, but are they
Yeah.
worldwide
They are
or
worldwide, and in the Mediterranean, that's a separate genetics. South Africa, separate genetics. There's some mysterious area, off of South America, off of Chile. We think there are some there, but nobody's really figured out, that part. But up in Japan, the China Sea, and then yeah, so they're distributed all the way around the world, but they maintain this this long-term separation. Very fascinating.
still all the same species?
Yeah, all the same species, and likely can still interbreed. Even, yeah, they have very slow mutation rate, and change rate of change in sharks. So they are likely still able to interbreed, but behaviorally they're just isolated.
Yeah, thank you.
It's fascinating.
And this, well, the recent species, which is about the great white shark now, which has been around for some 70 million years, I gather.
Yeah.
It has, you're saying basically that it hasn't really changed much. And
No.
and the change that came about 70 million years ago is from that super huge great white that existed, the
Megalodon.
megalodon.
So yeah, that would be one of its closer ancestral
Ancestors.
relatives, but yeah, they haven't changed that much in millions of years. It's true. Yeah. So if you think of it like they've reached some sort of evolutionary sort of
Okay.
perfection.
Perfection, and they're fine with it, and there's no need to change.
Yeah, they probably don't even think about it.
I don't think they consciously do. They just, if need be, they'll adapt, but
Right.
it's a
Right.
fascinating
Yeah.
thing that they haven't changed,
Yes.
that they haven't had the need to.
Yeah, well, the continents have shifted more, changed more than they have, over time. So,
Which is it's just remarkable to
yeah,
consider. Yes,
yeah.
that's
All right. Well,
Oh,
I'm probably
okay.
going to have to wrap it up there. I have my kids at home. And speaking of pups, I have mine at home that I should get to.
Well, I
Uh,
just want to mention that Catherine says it's an outstanding program, and Adrian and
Oh,
I second it with everyone else who participated. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. And thanks for everyone staying on. I see that we got a lot of numbers and they stayed for most of it, for all of it. So thank you very much. And I
Great. All
appreciate
right.
the opportunity.
All right.
Take
Thank you.
care.
All right,
Thank
thank you.
Okay. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Right. Oh, I'm supposed to be quiet for this.
Uh,